Hi, I'm Mary Baca, and I've done a podcast before. It's been a while. I went on sabbatical for a little bit and, intended to return. And here I am a couple of years later, believe it or not. COVID makes us feel like, where does time go, right? But one of the newest ventures that I have started, for those of you that know me, you'll know that I always have something going on, right? The thing in common of all of them is helping people. Like really, really, that is my life purpose is to help people. And the newest thing that I'm starting, it's been, a thought for about a year now, and quite a process to get approved by the state. But I've started a women's substance abuse and trauma recovery program called Rise Up. And it's a women's program. I believe that women have unique circumstances, and that's why I've started an IOP. Next year, I might do, a co-ed, but right now I'm doing a women's program. And our mission statement is there is no force more powerful than a woman determined to rise. Even stronger are women who rise up together, gaining strength through solidarity, sobriety, and trauma recovery. At Rise Up, we assist women in their journey of recovery from substance abuse and trauma at various levels using licensed professionals, peer-to-peer support, certified community support workers, and mentors. And one of the things that I decided to do related to the IOP that I've started is to do a podcast that will focus on addiction, trauma, mental health. And I don't know how often I'll do a show, probably every couple of weeks. And one of the most powerful things is to let people talk to you who have been through it, right? So today we have Gloria. That's all I'm going to say. She can further identify herself if she wants to. But I'm going to ask some questions, but really I just want her to relax into it and share her story in whatever capacity she wants to, because this woman is amazing. I've known her, I don't know, probably like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, maybe, long, long time. And recently it's so crazy because I don't usually do this, but I'm going to tell this story because it's kind of funny to me. You know, I hadn't talked to Gloria in that long, and I had been getting divinely guided and nudged recently to contact her, right? And I was like, okay, but I don't know how to contact her. I Googled her, I did all the things, right? That we can now do with the internet. And I happened to find out an address for her. That's kind of scary, right? In terms of what we can find out through the internet. But I drove over there, like never, ever in my life, like ever. And I knew she wouldn't think I was like stalking her or weird. But so I drove to the house that it gave on the internet, and I just left her a note saying, I don't know if this is still your house, but if it is, please call me. I'd like to talk to you. And so, sure enough, it was, probably a few days, probably about 4 days, I hear from her. And so we've been in contact now for a few months, I would say about 4 or 5 months. And it's been so nice to reconnect with you. And this woman's amazing. She has come so far in her life. And that's why I wanted her to come on. She's my first guest on the Rise Up show, on purpose, because I think that she's going to really inspire a lot of you, especially those of you who are struggling with addiction, struggling with trauma, just think you can't do it. And any kind of recovery, you guys, is not a straight line. It's not like linear, like you have a start and stop. It is an up and down daily effort. I don't have substance abuse issues, but I do have trauma issues, which I've received lots of therapy and lots of holistic healing and different things. And so I can attest to that end of it, that even with trauma, you really can, I don't believe in like recovered, because that would give the impression that we have nothing else to work on.
Right.
But I kind of like working on things, I discover so much about myself. So I
Yeah.
will say for my trauma recovery, it's been well worth it. I wouldn't do anything different. And it's an ongoing thing. I'm in therapy currently. And I get a lot of EMDR done, and we'll talk about that later at some point because it's a modality that I do as a practitioner, and then that I've received a lot in my lifetime that has been life-changing, honestly. But anyways, Gloria, have you ever told your recovery story?
Well, not not fully. I've shared bits in here and bits there, but not really fully. Um, so no, not really the full.
Well, but in a formal setting, have you ever like this? No.
Never.
So
Never.
when you say not fully, what what's difficult about, and not that I want you to do that today, because I'm just so grateful that you're here, but what keeps you from saying fully? Like, what are some of the challenges of that?
Well, the stigma,
Mm.
a lot of stigma, the 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 misunderstanding, the judgment, that kind of thing, is something that I struggle with, and I don't always want everybody, certain people to know certain things if I get a sense that there might be any of that, you know.
I mean, anybody's story is a very private thing. And
Yeah,
it takes a lot of vulnerability,
right.
Probably
hmm
if you didn't know me, you wouldn't be doing this, right? Like, I mean,
Right.
what made you say yes when I contacted you? Because you didn't even hesitate. I was like, I wasn't sure. I thought you might hesitate, but on the end that you responded to me, you didn't hesitate. I was like, wow, that's great.
Well, it's so funny because after I said yes without hesitation, I said, "What am I doing?" But I I know that I'm in a different place. I mean, as you said, it's been years, and there's been a lot of valleys but there's also been some mountaintop experiences, some victories and some lows, revisiting information or trauma that had to go back and be healed. And so I'm in a different place now, years and years, decades of working on that has caused me to be more confident, and also working with other people, realizing that everybody is doing the same thing, and they need to know this,
Right.
like you said earlier, that it's not just a linear thing. this is
Yeah.
a this is a process, and that it takes a willingness, and I think this is where I'm at on the process.
Yeah. And I love, like, I really want people watching this, men and women, to see that it's worth it, that the work is worth it, that
Yeah.
wherever you're at, in the program and anything, any kind of counseling I do, we meet people where they're at.
Right.
And, even in the substance abuse program, if somebody uses, they're not automatically going to get kicked out. That's part of recovery is relapse. And
Right.
so, but yeah, just really inspiring people to realize that you can do this, that it isn't linear, that it is a process, and that it's okay to not be okay at times.
Yeah.
When I asked you to come on the show, you said yes. There was some hesitation. How long have you been in recovery?
Well, this is going to tell you my age, and it's actually been a lot longer that I've known you.
Oh, wow.
So it'll show your
Wow.
age as
Well,
well.
that'll show my age too. You're going to out me on my age. It's all
Not on
right.
purpose, but
Yeah.
those of them who could do the math. So I was in my 20. I just turned 19
Oh
when
my
I when
gosh.
I went into a program, uh,
Wow.
and I basically been in recovery since then. It did start a little earlier because I was arrested at 13
Uh-huh.
uh, for being under the influence, and I had caused an accident driving a vehicle, and went into detention, the detention center, and that kind of thing, and they made me go to see a psychologist at the time.
Was that
So,
useful? Or what was that experience like at that age?
well, every experience does tell you something if you're willing to learn from it. And at that time, they didn't know a lot about PTSD. They didn't even call it PTSD. There I go dating us again. And they said that I was schizophrenic because of the psychosis. And
Right.
when you have severe trauma, You do have some psychosis at times because you get taken back with one of the PTSD symptoms, which is the syndrome. You get taken back into that space and that time, which might be triggered by something as simple as the weather changing, you know.
Yes. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
do feel like you're right there again. And that's how you're going to be talking to people. And, so
Yeah.
people are like, what are you talking about? Yeah.
Right.
Very
Yeah.
true.
And being very young, and even people who are older, I've worked with people who they don't realize that they're not there anymore.
Right.
They're here,
Yeah.
and that takes some learning and some growing and some recovery work, you know.
Right.
So,
I know one of the phrases when I'm doing EMDR with someone that I say, probably usually at the end to bring them back to present, is that was then and this is now. And I'll do some bilateral stimulation to just really
yes.
kind of
Hmm.
solidify that.
Very good. Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Um,
Hmm.
where were
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
at when your recovery process started? And tell us your story, however you'd like to tell it.
So, and you're talking about where was I at emotionally, mentally?
Yeah.
I
Like
had
what was
left my
going on?
mother's home. Yeah, I had left my mother's home. There was a lot of sexual and trauma there, physical
Mhm.
trauma, lot of trauma. It was just not a good environment, and so I left and was doing drugs. To
Mhm.
to self medicate. Um,
Yes.
I was still going to school, and I was working, and I lived with some people, and uh, like
How
I
old were
said,
you,
I
if you
was
don't mind sharing? Do you mind sharing your age at that point?
13.
Oh, 13. Okay.
Yeah. So that was when I was driving that car. Uh, and then of course they diagnosed me, and that's when I started researching. I would go to the library because I disagreed with the psychologist who said I was schizophrenic. And I
Mhm.
said, and I would challenge him and I'd say, there's no way I'm schizophrenic. Otherwise, I don't have all these other symptoms, you know. But
Yeah.
he didn't know what to call it. And he even said that, so that's what they're going to call it because he had to report to the courts.
Right.
So that's where I was at. And I started researching and
Good for
researching
you
and
that you
researching.
challenged him at that age. How brave of
I
you
would,
to
I had,
challenge.
yeah. Well, I was so scared when he said that I was schizophrenic.
Mm.
So I started going to the library and reading books and kind of started my journey on, researching what was happening with me.
And labels are so important. It's too bad we have to diagnose people for insurance and courts and different things.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So that's where I was at, but I was determined to not be like my family or to not do the same kind of things. Of course, I was on drugs, which is, that was something that was in my family. Mostly my brother-in-law, really, it was because the rest of them weren't really, it was my brother-in-law. And So I learned to self-medicate and that kind of thing. But I knew I couldn't stay in that situation, but that was the best I could do for myself at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 13. Holy cow. That's,
Right,
that's
right,
like young, right? Like when you look at a
right.
13-year-old now,
Yeah,
because a lot of times when people come from dysfunction at 13, they're like an adult. At 7, they're thinking like an adult. So I'll always tell clients, well, look at a 7-year-old, look at a 13-year-old, and you'll see really how young that is, you
right,
know?
right. Yep, exactly. Yeah.
And then
I
so how did things kind of move forward for you from there?
Well, I dedicated myself I went to the D home and of course I got clean. I dedicated myself to stay, uh, because I was so afraid of that diagnosis. I stayed in school and I was still working. Um, and I did my best to stay clean. But, of course, that was a pattern that I had developed at an early age. Talk about age. I was 6 years old and drinking,
Wow. Yeah.
alcohol and getting drunk at 9. I mean, literally drunk every day, and smoking pot at 8. And so, and doing harder drugs at 12. So it was a really hard pattern to break. Um,
Yes.
you know,
Well, and
and
then a lot of times, in recovery, like it's good to have something to replace those coping mechanisms with. But at those young ages, I mean, it's just like quick cold turkey with nothing, like
right.
no replacement
Mhm.
of any kind.
Right, right, yeah. Well, I did use school uh, education because I always loved learning, and I was constantly studying. I would study a lot, and then I also used work, so I worked a lot, and those things have not gone away. I still do a lot of that same thing, studying and working.
Well,
But
nothing wrong with those things, as long
right,
as you have balance,
right,
right? Because
right, yeah,
sometimes even those things can be out of balance too for
right,
some people.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was say able to balance them out, and you know, but every single time I had a episode of uh of PTSD, uh, I I would go back to using again. So I noticed that. So I went into a recovery program, uh, uh, at 19. So
Yeah. That's one thing, because I am a trauma specialist and I realize like how important that piece is to substance abuse recovery is the trauma piece, and really giving individuals the opportunity to look at that, learn about that, iron that out, in a trusting, safe environment. So
mhm.
important. So, so, so
Right,
important. People
right,
cannot quit the drugs and alcohol without that. Like there's just no way.
right. Reparenting myself, uh, uh, building my build, replace or implementing areas that were not given to me, such as uh, self-worth and you know
Yeah.
uh, uh, not abandoning myself anymore. Learning to self-soothe without uh,
Mm,
going to a alcohol or something like that. Uh, Learning to deal with uh, life
yeah.
in a healthy way. Learning to cry and let myself cry, and or finding a safe shoulder to cry on, and at the same time not become uh going back into old patterns and repeating those old patterns. Learning to move from uh the emotional uh uh what is the undeveloped emotional
Mm,
self to
mhm.
learning to grow and mature emotionally and mentally.
Well, I'm glad you said that because that's true that with that substance abuse and trauma, that they impact the brain, which, impacts a child or adult's development. So
Yeah,
you might have a 30-year-old adult who started using drugs at 10, and so that developmental level is greatly impacted. Like you're dealing with the 10-year-old in a lot of ways and not dealing with that adult. And I
right,
think a lot of times people don't really understand that.
right. And learning about that, and learning to do that for myself as well as people who I work with.
Mhm.
you know
Yeah.
I had to be able to identify it in myself, and then eventually I would apply that to people who
That's the best kind of work. A lot of people don't do that.
Right.
A lot of mental health professionals do not work on themselves. Or, or they might scratch the surface, Me, every time I look at things, I'm like, there's another stone I didn't turn over.
Right. Right.
Because it's
Exactly.
ever evolving. What has your evolution been like? Your recovery evolution? How would you describe that?
So I would say that uh, to begin with, I was just running, sort of running away from what happened to me, uh, and really stopping it myself by leaving the house at 13. Um, running from one of the reasons I believe that I became uh, uh, so involved in education or learning things or research is because nobody ever knew anything I mean, it was like, very arrested uh,
Mm.
education,
Uh-huh.
they're not talking, not listening, not, a lot of things. But going back to that question, I ran at first and hid,
Well,
from,
thank God you ran. Thank God at 13 years old
yeah,
that something in you said, I'm done with this.
right. Yeah.
I can't
So,
do this
yeah.
anymore.
And it worked for a while,
Uh-huh.
but, when you run from yourself, you always take yourself with you.
That's true. Yeah.
And
You're
so,
like, wait a minute.
wait a minute,
It's
who
not
is
worth it.
that? That's me.
So true.
So I had to learn to face things like, again, that's me. That's what I brought to this relationship. That's what I brought to this working environment. That's what I brought to uh, my own home, whatever. And
Mhm.
so I had to learn to face it and say, that is who I am, and I don't like it.
Right.
And that was hard. That was really hard. So then I had to learn to face who I was and admit that that was me. Um, and, you know, uh, the apples don't fall far from the tree. And our family tree is very, very important that we look at it in order to deal with it. And a lot of people run
Right.
from the family tree, but that family tree, you're still that apple seed from that
Right.
family tree. And
Right.
so
And you have to look at what's in common, what you have in common with the rest of the apples, you
right,
know?
right. And face them and really correct it in a way where you reach out for help, you learn to do better, you really be honest, really honest. Honest takes a lot of humility, not
Mhm.
humiliation, but humility, and being honest and saying, that's who I am and I don't like it,
Mhm.
I don't want to be that way. How do I change that?
And the powerful thing is you can change it. Like we grow up with situations as children, we don't have any control over that. But I always tell people take responsibility. And I mean it in a positive way because you can change those things. You can learn and reparent yourself, like you were saying, and change those things, which is
Mhm.
how exciting. It's hard work. But, at least there's empowerment there, right?
Yeah, and it is hard work. And
Mhm.
but it's worth it because you don't want to pass this on to your children.
Mhm.
That this, you want to change the seed, you know
Or
but
spill it in relationships, in romantic relationships, like spill it onto that other person, onto your children. I mean, that's just how all of this stuff goes, is it doesn't just affect the person in isolation,
right,
it spreads out.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, that's exactly where I was going, because our children are so important to us. That's why I started with our children, but it's other relationships too, even uh uh boomeranging back to our parents, or our our siblings or whatever. We start to treat them like we've been treated,
Mhm.
or we go to work and we can't get along with our boss because we relate to anybody in authority with as a threat or whatever it is.
Yeah,
And
whatever the transference, right? In our world, we
yeah,
call it transference, right?
right.
Yeah, projecting that onto
Exactly.
people.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'm speaking in like a lay person because you're interviewing me.
Yes, that's right. We'll tell people later what you do when you're alluding when you're like, and when I work with people, I want them to know, the work you do with people.
Yeah.
Um, what kind of support have you received along the way?
Mostly there have been, and that's another thing too, is that you have to learn that, see, there's people in your life for a season. Even you and I, we were in each other's life for a season, and then that ended, for a season. So it was just people here and there, um beginning, and you know learning to be receptive, teachable.
Mhm.
Like you taught me some things. We met in our 20s. You taught me some things back then, and then another person taught me some things 2 years later, and another person taught me or continued to teach me for another decade or
Mhm.
whatever. But
Mhm.
just learning from them, you know, uh, and not and really staying cognizant of what I was feeling, thinking, uh, interpreting, you know, questioning. Uh, that's where that part of me that again was a researcher, which got triggered by that one psychologist. I wish I could remember his name. He probably long gone because I was 13 and he was probably 35. So, but just really saying, what is really going on here?
And so
Uh,
even he influenced you, right? Even though you
oh yeah,
didn't agree with what he said and you
oh yeah,
challenged it, like that made you do that
yeah,
research.
yeah.
So that was good.
As a matter of fact, I believe he was the catalyst to me becoming even a better and more keen on what PTSD really is, and complex PTSD,
Mhm.
as well as uh, uh, a dissociation, which is a part of PTSD,
Right.
so, or major dissociation disorders,
Yeah.
I became a better expert, in my opinion,
Mhm.
because what he said didn't make sense. He's looking at a book, which is okay. I mean, I learn from books all the time, but he could not answer or refused to answer because he said, I know what you're saying is true, but he couldn't go get away from that book.
Mhm.
And that's something that I believe that has made me uh, a better practitioner, because of the fact that I could step outside of the book, you
Yeah.
know.
We have such a balancing act as mental health professionals, right? Because we have to use like the DSM-5 for insurance and things. We have to. But then we also have to know that that's not in itself enough. And then you have the book, and then you have the real person. Working with the real person is different. You're not going to find that in a book. You're really not. You're going to, maybe get a glimpse, but who that person really is, you can't really find in a book. And you better be comfortable with that. You better be comfortable with looking outside the box in order to really align with that person and have good rapport, right? And get
Right,
trust of that person,
right. And the and that makes you a better helper,
right?
because if that
Absolutely.
person yeah, because if you're helping somebody who's they know you're putting them in a box. uh Even the fact that the psychologist said to me, I know what you're saying is right,
Mhm. Mhm.
that right there said, okay, I don't
That was
have
very
to.
validating, right? Very validating. He didn't have the
Exact.
answer, but he validated that, yeah, I know what you're saying is right.
And he even said the only other explanation is combat fatigue or something. I forget what it's called. Now it's so outdated that it's not even in the DSM. But is it, where soldiers go off to war and they're
Yeah,
combat disorder. Combat
yeah.
disorder.
Uh,
He said the only thing other than that would be combat disorder, and you don't have all the you don't have the criteria. You don't meet the criteria for that. And I said, but I don't meet the criteria for other the other diagnoses
mm.
either. And
You're
he's
like,
like, I
quit
know you're
fitting me
right.
into criteria, you know?
Yeah. He says, but I have to tell the judge something.
Yeah.
So I said, and I got very upset with him. And of course, I'm 13 years old, and
Well, you know what, too? The other
he,
thing you're touching base on that I love is, and I tell parents this all the time when their teenagers or children are acting out, I'm like, you got to figure out why the behavior is occurring. Because I think parents get so caught up in the behavior that they forget the why, you know? And so I tell parents, I don't work with young children, I have, but I don't, because oftentimes the parents are harder to deal with than the child, but with adolescents, at least you can impart those learning, an adolescent like you learned and could be open and could, empower themselves to grow beyond the hand that they were given, But
yeah,
yeah, a lot of parents just want to look at the behavior. My son is flunking out of high school and I'm gonna take away his gains and do this and do that. Consequence, instead of looking at, okay, but why? Why?
right. What is the message?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. What is the message? And it could be a message that he's trying to tell you, a message that that he's told himself, excuse me, or he's heard, you know,
Mhm.
uh, what is the message?
Yeah,
Uh,
and what is really, I think trauma is the root of so many things, at everything, really. Honestly, That doesn't mean
yeah.
everybody has PTSD. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm
Mhm.
saying that, when you look at what trauma is, first of all, it's subjective. So it's whatever the person, if, what traumatizes Joe may not be what traumatizes Annette. And
Mhm.
so there's that. What methods and approaches did you get involved in at the beginning and throughout your recovery? Like what kinds of stuff worked? Did group therapy work? You mentioned you went to recovery program.
I went to a, Christian recovery program. So uh, uh, there was a lot of group meetings, um, and then there was a lot of prayer, a lot of support,
Mhm,
a lot of reading of scripture. Now, I also had a time where, and this was just before I met you, I think, yeah, uh, where I got very angry with the 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 institution that I was with, because they were not being I found out that they weren't integral. Okay.
mhm,
So that really disappointed me because I was thinking this is the answer,
mhm.
and but I was looking to an institution, not a God, my
Right.
God. Okay.
Mhm,
But I got very angry, and that's just before I met you, and I had to go. I did resort back to using drugs
mhm,
because I was so angry. And see, it's not just like, oh, I'm having PTS symptoms, uh, and or I'm having flashbacks or whatever however you want to say, I'm having memories again or whatever. It was anger and the rage
mhm,
that it took me years to deal with. But at that time, I had went into a rage and I started using drugs again. Uh, and I knew I couldn't do this to myself anymore. I knew that I
Uh,
just couldn't. So it was about 9 months or so, and I went to another treatment center, which was a secular treatment center. And again, I do the whole thing. Uh, um, but it gave me a time to get clean again and start thinking soberly. And then that's when I was very I was enraged, and that's when I met you because I had uh, I had I was still struggling with uh, worthlessness.
mhm,
And I went ahead and I did a crime. And it was the stupidest crime, but it wasn't that I was trying to do that crime for to get away with it or anything. I was trying to do that crime so I could get off of off of this out of this world, really,
mhm,
you know.
mhm.
And then they sent me to you.
I
That's when I met
remember.
you, Mary.
It's crazy. Yeah, I remember I was a caseworker though. And I remember God, I can't believe we were in our 20s. Holy smokes, man. That was before I started my private practice. But yeah, I remember going because at that time the program was like home based. So, we would do home visits. And I remember going and seeing you in your home environment. Yeah.
Yeah, I lived by myself, and
Mhm.
um I I had to report once a week. I did really good. I mean, they put me on probation for 5 years, not one incident. And during that 5 years, uh, well, uh, and this is really emotional for me. So hopefully I don't, but
Okay.
I had gotten pregnant right before I met you. Now, I had been celibate for years. So this was a big thing. And I had had an ovary removed when,
Mm,
earlier years, a decade before. And they told me, don't worry about birth control because you don't, you have a 10% chance of getting pregnant. Well, I had been celibate, and here I go and have, sex, and I get pregnant. And I was so upset because I was like, is nothing going to go right? You know what I mean?
mhm.
Um, and so I had started seeing you when I was pregnant, I think, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I do remember that.
And then, but my daughter, um, turned out to be another catalyst.
Mhm.
I realized that I had to be responsible and I had to take care of somebody else. And again, I did not want to repeat the patterns that were, from the tree, the apple tree. I wanted to change the behaviors. I wanted to change my life, at least for her sake. I didn't feel
Mhm.
I had much worth, but
Right.
her life, she didn't
You're
deserve
like,
it.
I don't deserve it, but she surely does, kind of thing.
Yeah.
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 So 5 years on probation. By that time, she's 4.5 or 5 or so. Uh,
Yeah, I don't know if you know this or not, but that program closed like overnight because the director embezzled money. Did you know that? Isn't
yeah,
that crazy? How
yeah,
insane. Yeah.
I know. Yeah,
So I mean, because all this stuff that we're talking about, substance abuse, trauma, uh it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter, right? Like what somebody's socioeconomic status is or how smart they are or whatever. It doesn't distinguish,
right,
you know?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the person that I was working with in the forensics field, she ended up
Mhm.
embezzling. Um, yeah, and robbed me but 4 grand. You know,
Oh man.
'cause I was working
Yeah.
for her program. seeing the high risk offenders. So yeah.
I think this field, I mean, because I've seen it, I think that the field of therapy or counseling or, forensics attracts people who have not worked on their stuff. And a lot of social workers and counselors and different people, when you ask them, well, why did you start going to school for this? It's like, well, I thought I could fix myself. Okay, well, have you gone another route? Test yourself, But yeah, I remember
Mhm.
talking to you about that too. Yeah, that's crazy,
Mhm.
just
Yeah,
being that out of control where you're at
right.
that level responsible for other people professionally and doing things like that, and yet that's how it goes,
Not
right?
only that, the clients too. I mean, they were high risk offenders. Yes, they were kind of the, for lack of a better word, and to borrow the phrases from the world. I mean, what everybody else says, they were the worst of the worst, but they still were people,
Yeah.
and they were
Yes.
trying to get their lives together.
Yes. Yeah.
And she robbed them blind. It was
Oh my
like all
gosh.
of us. So
Yeah, that's
anyway,
terrible. Did she get caught? I imagine.
I don't know if she got caught.
I don't know what happened with this guy either. I never heard the follow-up.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So who
Yeah.
knows?
Wow. That's awful. I've never heard his name again, though. I'll tell you
Right.
that. And I was in my 20s, so I didn't really look into what happened. Me and a colleague tried to get the program. We did an RFP, a request for proposal, and we lost it by one.
Hmm.
But yeah.
Hmm.
So let's see, my other questions. What have been the most important? I think you just mentioned one, your daughter. What have been the most important life-changing events in your recovery that have helped you stay strong and motivated?
Um, so um, I really have to say, my relationship with God. I mean, I can't
Yes.
really, I mean, there were so many things that happened even afterwards. And, like, I don't know if it was before we started or after we started recording, but we think that, oh no, you had mentioned it's a linear. We oftentimes we get the idea that this is going to be a linear thing. I'm going to have a stopping point. I'm going to be able to go on with my life. You know, 5 years ago, memories started coming up that I guess I just wasn't ready for until
Yeah.
5 years ago. And
Right.
these were a very, very traumatic memories, um, that were, I mean, I had a very traumatic experiences, multiple experiences with my stepfather, in early childhood. And okay, again, this is what I believe is that because I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
If I
Yes.
had remembered these 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I would have probably gone a little nutty.
Hmm.
And I realized, going back to the rage, that that's where that rage came from, because
Hmm.
I had a stepfather who was, he never molested me sexually or anything like that, but he was malignant and malicious, and he would put cigarettes out on me and burn my eyelids and burn my skin and things like that.
Hmm.
And I was restricted from speaking or saying anything or crying, and the tears would just come out of my eyes, but I couldn't say a word. I couldn't murmur or anything. And I think that rage was bottling, and I just went into a rage of, uh, uh, with all the memories that came up.
Just lashing out.
Hmm.
Mhm.
But I didn't. I didn't do all the other, that's when I mean, I had realized before that, but I had broken all the other patterns, but the rage, I would stuff it and stuff it and stuff it because I knew that I had to. Otherwise, it was bad enough where I could kill somebody, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And but 5 years ago, when it came up, um, or 4 years ago, really, because it was during COVID too,
Mm.
for the first year of COVID, just
COVID
a
was
few,
hard for people because of the restriction.
right. And uh, but for me, it turned out to be a good thing because I was able to deal with myself. I wasn't having to pay attention, distract myself. I wasn't able to distract myself, and 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 even looking back at it now, I could see how God used that for me to be completely healed of that. You know, all the memories that were coming back were, I mean, they were horrendous, and I was just having to deal with it. Uh, they would be dreams, they would be flashbacks, they would be uh, body memories.
Mhm.
So there I go again on my research. The body keeps the score. Reading that book again, and complex PTSD, researching that, and how does that work, and why, and da da da. How does that get up to be a problem?
Have you ever had EMDR done?
No, I have never had EMDR done,
Pretty
but
amazing.
I did it to myself.
Oh, I don't know if I would advise that. But you being the researcher that you are, I could see where you would do that.
Yeah, and then I did everything I could to take care of myself,
Uh-huh.
as a practitioner. But I realized the rage had to come out, and I had to do that in with one-on-one with God,
Mhm.
and just talking to him and being really honest and saying, you know, and rage at not just my abuser, but rage at God, rage at
Mhm.
my family, rage at my mother, rage at because they saw the scar or the injuries. They saw these things, and nobody did anything.
Wow.
It was such a
Yeah.
big secret, you know.
Yeah.
Although now this is something a few months now, all this is happening, and then I'm starting to recover, feeling a little bit better, but I was still very, very emotional and tearful about my mother not protecting me. And then I had a memory, and she had come up behind me and lifted me up, and but she had gasped first. She gasped at me because she finally saw me. And see, he was really good at hiding how, because she was the one that worked, he didn't work. Okay. So she worked in the morning. She would leave before it was light. She would come home when it was dark, and he would put me to
Oh.
bed. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
she never saw me.
Yeah.
Okay. And she worked all the time because she had to take care of all these kids, and pay the bills and everything. He didn't work. And one day she saw me, and she gasped, and she realized, she put two and two together. I could see it in her face. I could read her face. She put two and two together that he was the one that was doing that. And she had seen something before, but he said uh, that I was doing it to myself, that I was burning myself with cigarettes. And then, but then like 2 months later, I have this other memory, and she saw me, and then they were arguing, like it's what is it, back and forth, like, uh not yelling or screaming, just like, and he's like, gaslighting. And she comes behind me and grabs me and pulls me up and lifts me up and says, "You're coming with me." And she took me to work with her for several months.
Wow.
And I would go
Wow.
and she would hide me in the car on the floor bed of the car. And she'd take me a little lunch with water. And
Oh,
yeah,
very sweet. And she was being protective during that time.
yeah. And that was the best she could do. And that
Yeah.
was why she sent me off to live with other people, because it couldn't go on forever. It was, plus I remembered another memory too, that she had gotten caught because she worked in a facility for o- older people. I forget what they're called, but nursing home. And she was sitting at the desk, and her boss caught me under the desk. Um,
Oh.
so he told her she couldn't do that no more. So that's when she sent me to live with other people, because I didn't grow up at home, after that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just kind of put all the pieces together that was why mom was felt so guilty, and
Mm-hmm.
why mom didn't challenge me when I would get drunk at 9 years old, or when I demand that she'd come and get me, because nobody would talk to my mother like that. No,
Mm-hmm.
um, but I wasn't disrespectful or anything, but if I called her and said, "Come and get me now," she would go and get me.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So those were some good memories to have.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, those
I
are,
think that's the other
but
thing too. All the memories are not bad, right? Because sometimes people, I know when I'm doing setup for EMDR, I tell people it's not only bad memories that come up, there's good stuff that comes up too.
mhm. Yeah,
Mm.
because what happens is, uh, the dark memories, oftentimes they have to be healed so
Mhm.
that the light can shine,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know. And so I went through the dark memories first, and then here comes the
It's
light.
like it makes room in the brain for
Hmm.
the good as the bad kind of gets shifted, and processed, it creates room in the brain for
Right.
the good
And
stuff.
it's part
Yeah.
of that reparenting process. It's part of that healing, healing those hurts, those wounds, those those scary times, like you do with EMDR. You take that scariness and you work it through so that you can get into the light. You know, it's just part of the healing process. You know,
Mhm.
uh, when you uh, when you have a surgery, the first few days are the worst.
Mhm.
And then you start to recover, and it's still painful, but then it gets sweeter and sweeter.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
yeah.
If you were to tell someone today something, what would you want to say to somebody to give them hope and inspiration? What would you say?
There's It depends on the person, but I'm imagining a person who has no hope, as you mentioned.
Mhm.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Mhm.
You got to go through the tunnel, and it's not going to be easy, and you're not necessarily going to like the smell, or the rats that live there, or the the darkness. Uh, you're not going to know where be able to see where you're stepping, because if it's a pretty dark tunnel, you have to carefully tread.
Mhm.
However, you'll start to see the light, and it'll be worth it.
It is worth it,
Yeah.
right? What
Hmm.
would you tell your addicted and traumatized self? What would you say to her today?
You did it.
That's so
You did
amazing.
it.
And she did do it, right? Like we can't heal with those parts of ourselves that are wounded. Like there really is, value to, those selves, like nothing to be, because I think a lot of times people are ashamed of those selves and and don't want to deal with those inner children. And it's like you need those children to heal, you know? That's
Yeah.
also where the creativity is and the
Hmm.
freedom, all these positive things, right? The wonderment of life, is also with those inner parts of ourselves. And it's like, yeah, but she did do it.
Yes.
You want to share what you do today to help
So
people? It sounds
so
like,
today I basically walk them through a journey, and it depends on where they're at. And
but
this
but in what capacity? That's what I mean. What
uh
do you do?
I
Like, what do you,
do I do spiritual coaching and counseling.
Mhm.
So I do that. Um and I can't I can't do this the coaching or the counseling without the spiritual component. It's in my opinion, we're missing a whole lot right there.
Mhm.
So I just decided that's something I'm going to have to do. So I do that, and talking about the inner selves coming and flourishing and um, beginning to uh, develop and become become the whole part of become part of the whole person.
Mhm.
uh, I have discovered so many things about myself that I'm like, wow, I didn't know that that was there. And
Yeah.
that's something that we work on and developing, the healing, really, the person, whether uh, it's the inner self that is, stuck at 2 or stuck at 10,
Mhm.
or whatever,
Mhm.
healing that part. Um,
Yeah. The parts work.
mhm.
So important. Yeah.
Yeah.
So important, so powerful. And I think a lot of counselors don't do that work, I don't know if it's interesting, right? I don't know if it's because they haven't, I think it's that. Like if you haven't done the work yourself, how, and I tell counselors all the time that I train, I'm like, how can you even know where to lead and guide someone, what direction to even move toward if you haven't done work on yourself? I
Yeah.
really believe that strongly.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Anything else you want to share? Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Mary, for having me. I meant to thank you at the beginning and I was a little nervous, so I guess I forgot. But I do want to thank you for thinking of me when you decided you want to do this. And I feel very honored. Thank you. Uh, and that's pretty much it. Just
Yeah,
to
I'll be
give
playing
the
this for our group of women, and maybe sometime you can come in person because, there's so much that can be said more on a personal level, right?
right,
When you're talking to a group of
right.
people versus this, right?
Yes.
So I'll
And
let
to
you know,
your,
but I would love to have
you know,
you come.
oh, I'd be happy to. Yeah. And to your audience who are listening, I'm not sure which platform or venue you will be using, but those of you who are here today, something we said caught your attention or the title or whatever, there's a reason that you're here. And like we were saying earlier, research that, look into that, ask yourself why. What is this thing that continues to, I used to call it, continues to haunt me, you know,
Mhm.
uh, and plague me. And you don't have to live with that. You don't.
Yeah, and don't yeah, and you don't have to do it alone either. Like,
Mhm.
whether you go see your priest or your pastor or a counselor, whatever does it for you, like, don't walk through it alone either. You don't have to,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Like, there are people that want to help you and want to walk with you through it and let
Right.
yourself do that. That's hard to do though. When you're hurt so badly as a child, it is hard to allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to trust someone else,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
It
man,
takes
that gives a
courage.
lot of growth. It does take a lot of courage.
Yeah.
It
And we
does.
all have it. We all have courage.
Mhm.
And you don't have to do it all at once, but start somewhere. you
Yeah.
know.
I mean, look how much courage it takes to go through the abuse. I mean, yeah, there's not a choice there, but how much courage does that take? So you have the courage. You
Yes,
have the courage there, like you're saying.
exactly.
Thank you so much, Gina.
Thank
And
you.
I will talk to you soon.
Okay, take care,
Okay.
Mary. Okay.
Bye-bye.